Hello. I'll wait for McKenzie to get on here. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Oh my God, we have a lot of attendees. This is exciting. Welcome the POW community. We are really excited to be here today. My name is Zaria Forman, and I am here with McKenzie Skiles, who is assistant professor at University of Utah, and she researches snow hydrology. So I want to just start with asking you, McKenzie, well, thank you, first of all, for coming, and ask you how you're part of this outdoor community. What do you love about nature? Give us a little background on you.
Sure, I'd love to. I grew up in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, actually, and grew up skiing, and I've always loved being outdoor, and I've always loved being out in the snow. And as I got older and went to college, I found a way to sort of combine my love of snow with my interest in climate change and what's driving changes in these outdoor places I really love. And that led me to be a snow hydrologist. And so now I get to study not only how much water is held as snow all over the world, but how that's changing over time. And I've, of course, seen your incredible work, and I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about you, how you became an artist, and what kind of work you do.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. I think we come maybe from slightly similar backgrounds. I didn't grow up in Alaska, but I grew up traveling to really remote places my whole life. My mother was a landscape photographer, and so she was really fascinated with just like finding the most faraway places she could possibly photograph. And so from a really early age, my whole family would go on trips for about 1 month every summer to really faraway places, and we would just spend a lot of time just outdoors in like pristine nature with no people or buildings around. And so those experiences just really like instilled in me a deep love of landscape, and that hasn't faded at all and continues to be a big part of my life and what I do. And yeah, so I know I'm gonna switch gears into climate change because I know that both of us, our work is very similar in that way. We both focus on it really intently in very different ways. I'm an artist, you're a scientist. And so I'm just curious how you became a hydrologist and kind of like more about what that actually means. Like, I have no idea what you do. Like, what does that mean on a broad scope, like big projects that you focus on, and then also on like a daily basis, the micro stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm pretty fortunate because I get to ski for a living. I get to do a lot of field work and go outside and be in these environments that I study. And then I also look at it at a really broad scale and long temporal scales using other records like remote sensing and climate models, and look at how snow cover is changing over time, and then what that means for water resources and for climate. So I think we all know that snow is a really bright reflective surface, and the less snow we have over time, the less bright our Earth is. It absorbs more sunlight, and that whole process accelerates climate change. And so that's just sort of the angle that I've taken to understand climate change better and the impact that it's having on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm curious if you, because I joined a couple of NASA ice bridge operations where we were flying over. Yeah, you're like, yes, I know what you're talking about. I was curious if maybe you used the data that we collected flying over both poles. They basically like measure the depth of, well, the geography of the ice in all kinds of ways. But you said something about, well, I forget what you said now actually, but it was some kind of that they used. And I was like, wait, I wonder their data.
Yeah. That Operation Icebridge is measuring what we call altimetry, or the height of the ice sheet. And so we can use that data to assess how the ice sheet is changing over time. And unfortunately, that change now is a decrease over time, which means we're losing ice mass over the Greenland ice sheet. And I study Greenland, but I also really focus on mountains in the Western US and how snow cover is changing in the mountains of the Western US. And there's other data sets like Icebridge that we can use to study those changes as well.
That's so cool. I've actually never met a scientist outside of the Icebridge community that is using their data. So it's fun to like, I saw it being collected and now you're actually using it and putting it to work and helping us better understand our climate. So thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I work with climate change, I guess. I make really large scale landscape drawings that document climate change. And the places that my drawings depict are really remote locations, kind of like what I was talking about before. They're at the forefront of climate change, or the polar regions, or the Maldives. And so they're places that most people don't really get to see on a regular basis or at all ever in their life. And so in a lot of ways, the issues there seem really remote and like totally disconnected from our everyday life. And so the purpose of my drawings is to basically recreate exactly what I saw on site as best as I can, with as much detail as I possibly can, to allow a chance for viewers to feel like they've been transported to these places. And hopefully they'll fall in love with them as I did.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because especially the ice sheets are these like kind of distant, far away places that are kind of cold and lifeless, or that's how people maybe picture them in their minds, if they even picture them at all. And art can be such an important way to draw a connection to those places that are far away.
Yeah, I agree. And I know, like, both of us try to communicate climate change in very different ways. And I think it's such a complex issue. And I think it's really important to kind of learn how, or figure out many different ways of how to communicate it from all different angles. That was like the purpose of why I flew with NASA. I was like, why are scientists inviting me to come fly with them, like a little artist from Brooklyn? But that was why, like, they needed help communicating the data in a more kind of emotional way. But like, we also need the data. That's of course extremely important. So I'm curious how, like, just to understand how we can get better at it, if you have any tips for us, and how you go about doing that yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from a scientist perspective, I think for a long time, the view was that scientists should just kind of, stay in their little ivory tower and publish papers, and then other people would take that information and do something with it. And I think that's really outdated, and it doesn't really work that way. Who better to communicate climate change and climate change science than scientists themselves, and especially scientists who enjoy going out in nature and actually see these changes firsthand. And I think what I've learned about climate change and climate change communication and science communication is that you don't have to know everything, and I think it really helps if you talk from a personal space. So I really like to talk about how I grew up in Alaska, and you can see the changes from climate change in Alaska firsthand. The snow cover is not where it used to be. The rivers don't ice up anymore. The Iditarod can't start where it used to start. It's all these things that I grew up seeing firsthand. I try to use those to bolster my communication. So I think it's just knowing. It's really a communication and knowing where your audience is coming from and making a connection with them. And I think that's the best any of us can do. And I know you talked a little bit how you use art as your sort of climate communication. You use these pastel drawings as a way to communicate climate. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what inspired that work? Yeah, sure. Just to comment on something you said, I think the emotional connection is really key, and I use that in my own work as well. So yeah, just to help viewers, maybe if they're trying to figure out how to communicate it, I think it's really important to look at those stories that are just like right in your backyard, close to home, that are affecting you, and make it personal, because that's what people really connect to, that personal connection. And one main purpose of my work has to do with that. Basically, it's psychology, which has proven to us that we as human beings take action and make decisions based on our emotions. I shouldn't point to my head. On our emotions. More than anything else, literally, we make all our decisions and actions based on our emotions more than anything else. And so, and art specifically has a really special ability to tap into emotions. That's not just something I think that's also been scientifically proven that it does. So when I make these drawings, I'm trying to offer viewers a chance to connect with these really far away places at the forefront of climate change. And like I said before, in the hopes that they will fall in love with them in the way that I have. And when you love something, you want to protect it, right? So
hopefully they'll, it'll spark action. It will spark even just an intention to want to help do whatever they can to protect and preserve these places. And it's also really important to me to show the beauty of these places as opposed to the devastation, because I want to inspire people instead of frighten them, basically. Like, I think it's important to show the devastation. I think we need those scary news reports. We need the horrible pictures and the videos of the glacier crumbling. But just me personally, like, I operate out of positivity and being inspired and being, as opposed to being terrified. So that's just me. And so that's why I want to make my work about the beauty, to try and inspire people. And I know that's something that's also really important to you, McKenzie, to kind of focus on the positive. So I'm curious how you do that, how you balance kind of sharing the natural wonders of the world with your students while also, showing them what's at risk, what's at stake, and what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think in my teaching and mentoring, I think the science is really important, and the science is very clear. Scientists agree across the board that climate change is happening and that it's accelerating and that humans are the cause, and that can lead to a lot of negativity, sort of this overwhelming feeling of we're too deep, like what can we do now? Like we're too far. Can we reach these sort of landmarks that have been set out by these climate change panels? But really, I'm lucky that I also get to teach outside. And I think that nature kind of speaks for itself. We have these beautiful spaces. I get to go out to the mountains and in the deserts of southern Utah and teach my students. And really, all I can say is just say, like, look around us. It's so beautiful. It's worth saving. Let's all do what we can. And we all have different resources. We're all coming from different places. We all have different toolkits. But if we, if we kind of utilize what we have at hand, I think working together, we can make a difference.
I agree. I feel like art is my toolkit. Like, that's the thing I think I'm good at. And so that's the avenue I've chosen to use. But like everything, like, we need all hands on deck. It's all really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to see more of your work. I was curious if we could share a piece or see something that you're working on now.
Yes, absolutely. And here it comes. So this is a piece I made fairly recently. I'll give you just a little bit of background and my inspiration, which is, there's kind of a few parts to it, so give me a sec. But so basically, the trips I mentioned before, where I flew with NASA's Operation Icebridge over, this particular drawing was from a flight we did over Greenland, over the Jakobshavn Glacier, which is right next to Ilulissat, Greenland, and it has the most, it dispenses the most icebergs. It's one of the fastest moving glaciers in all of the Arctic. You probably know this. And it dispenses, like, I think 6% of all the icebergs in the Arctic. It's said that the iceberg that sunk the Titanic may have come from this glacier. So it's kind of like a famous glacier, and we spent hours and hours just flying over it, and while the scientists were measuring, and I was just shooting out the window of the cockpit with my camera. And so that's why it's like, it's an aerial view, but you still get a little bit of perspective and or depth, I should say. And just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, or the audience maybe, because you might know, but these big ridges are called seracs, and they're about like 100 feet apart from one another. So that gives you just a little sense of scale. And this place in particular was really special to me because the very first time I ever visited the Arctic was in 2007 with my family for my mother's photography. And that was the first time I ever saw, this is the first glacier I ever saw, first icebergs I ever saw came from it. And it was obviously, it was a mind-blowing experience. And it was also the trip that really opened my eyes to the climate crisis. Because back in 2007, we were not really talking about the climate crisis in the United States as we are today. But in a place like Greenland, literally everyone staying at the hotel that we were staying at were like newscasters coming to write about the ice, or government officials coming to learn, or scientists coming to study the ice. And so all those conversations, just like, and even with the locals who are having to adapt their lifestyle, just completely made me realize the severity of the crisis, and I learned about what it actually was. And so I shifted my focus specifically to climate change in my work from that trip. So that was 2007. And then 5 years after that, I took a trip back to the same place where I was planning a trip with my mom, but she ended up passing away before we got to go together. So it ended up instead being a trip that I led in her honor, with a group of people, and so it was emotional and very meaningful to me. And I ended up spreading her ashes in the bay where this glacier dispenses icebergs into, per her request. So that location really has like a lot of personal meaning to me, because it, I feel like, you know, my mom's like a part of that landscape now. And so then 5 years after that, so 5 years after I spread my mom's ashes, was when I got to fly over the glacier with NASA and see it from a totally new perspective. So there's my long backstory about this piece. And
I'm sorry to hear about your mom, but that is a beautiful story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, she you know, gave me a lot of gifts, and I think leading that trip to Greenland was probably the biggest one. I don't know if she meant to, but it was like, you know, I just felt like I had to do it in her honor, and undertaking that really like made me realize, oh, I can do this. Like I can undertake these kinds of trips that she's been taking me on my whole life. And anyway, yeah, I would love to hear your more scientific perspective on this piece, if there's anything you can share and then enlighten us about.
Sure. I think Greenland and the Arctic in general is a great way to start any conversation about climate change. It's sort of the, you know, canary in the coal mine for what's happening to our Earth and our globe, and what's sort of the impacts that maybe are to come. So the Arctic has responded in a really dramatic fashion to warming temperatures. Temperatures there are increasing at more than double the rate as the rest of the globe.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of that, you know, we can attribute a lot of that to just warming air temperatures, but of course it's always slightly more complicated than just warming air temperatures. A lot of it has to do with the loss of sea ice, so we're getting less extent of sea ice over time, and we're getting less snow cover. So you can see in this picture that there's ice, this like bare kind of blue ice underneath this sort of layer of bright snow. And the less snow that we have, the more ice gets exposed, and ice is darker than snow. And so the more ice exposed, the more sunlight that's absorbed and the faster melting we get. So this is, you know, we all love that blue glacier ice, but the more and more of that blue glacier ice that shows through indicates it absorbing more sunlight, and it's going to be melting faster. And summer melting of the Greenland ice sheet has increased pretty rapidly since the 1990s to a really unprecedented level, 2 to 5 times faster than before the Industrial Revolution. So it just, you know, climate warming is impacting this region. It's happening at a faster rate than the system can respond to or adapt to. And so this is just, this area is just a really dramatic example of maybe changes that are to come in other places of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. I remember flying over these places, especially the sea ice areas just outside off of the glacier in the Arctic Ocean, where that was like the place where the scientists were saying, wow, like I can just see a difference with my naked eyes without even looking at the instruments and the data that's coming through.
Yeah, it's so dramatic. And I've been lucky enough to spend 2 field seasons in Greenland. And even, you know, between 2013, the first time I went, and last summer, the change is visible to me. Yeah. And I just happened to be there during both times, sort of following these periods of widespread melt where the whole glacier experienced melt. And that hasn't really happened over the time frame that we've been measuring and monitoring the Greenland ice sheet. And then it happened in 2012 and again last year. So for it to happen, you know, and so close in time when we have never really experienced that kind of widespread melt event before, is just really dramatic.
What does that mean that the whole glacier was melting? Can you explain that a little more?
So that's a great question. So normally, the ice sheet, it's hard to picture the ice sheet, but the ice sheet has topography, just like mountains. There's sort of a high peak The divide of Greenland is pretty high, and it's cold, and it usually stays cold all year round. So usually snow is this accumulation zone where snow keeps falling and accumulating. It usually doesn't melt at those sort of high areas in the accumulation zone. And then now we've seen like during our life
on top of the ice sheet in the middle of Greenland.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So melt across the top, even in this like typically really cold accumulating zone, they saw melt of the snow, which is really abnormal. And then it happened again a few years later. So it's just warming in places that typically shouldn't be warming, melting in places that typically wouldn't be melting.
Yeah, I had no idea. You always see those maps of like an aerial shot of Greenland, and you see it like red, melting on the edges and green, but I've never seen it in the middle. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's dramatic, and it can have an impact on the local communities as well. Like, I don't, maybe people aren't aware that a decent amount of people live in Greenland, and in 2012, after the widespread melt event, enough melt was coming off the ice sheet that it actually like tore out bridges and had a dramatic impact on the coastal communities there. And
they don't even have that much infrastructure to begin with, so
right,
like no roads between towns or anything.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and one of the stories that really struck me when I was there speaking to the locals is like a lot of them are subsistence hunters, meaning they get their food from hunting as opposed to the grocery store, or maybe most of it from hunting. And their hunting grounds are the fjords when they freeze over in winter. So they can dog sled out onto the fjords and go hunt for animals. And what's happening is that the fjords aren't freezing over anymore in the winter. And so they basically just don't have their hunting grounds. So if you don't have enough, funds to buy or have a boat and buy gas, then you're kind of stuck. Like there are no roads between towns. So what are you going to,
right?
Yeah. So they're really having to figure out how to adapt their lifestyle in a very quick and meaningful way.
Yeah. I think the fact that these changes are happening, normally climate changes over these like really long time scales, we wouldn't even really notice them in our sort of short little blip of our sort of lifetimes. And now these changes are happening, where we can say, 10 years ago it was different, or 15 years ago it was like this. And so just the rate of change is indicative of just, how much, it's just going to keep accelerating unless we can get active and sort of get these policy changes in place. Yeah, and that takes, kind of both of our work and getting out there and communicating with people.
Mm-hmm. And everybody listening.
I was wondering, you showed me another piece from South America. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your like work or trips down there and what you saw.
Sure. Yeah, I ended up the last winter. Wait, no, this was 2018 to 19, like over or just before the New Year's. So yeah, not this past winter, but the winter before. I went down to Antarctica for a month aboard the National Geographic Explorer. And that was my second time down there with them as the artist in residence. And then from there spent about 6 or 4 weeks in Patagonia. And I wasn't planning on actually making work, like kind of Antarctica was that time, and then Patagonia was supposed to be my vacation. I never really travel for vacation anymore because it's always like I always have work to do. Like I'm always inspired, I guess. It's hard not to be inspired when you go to beautiful places, which is always where I want to go when I have time. And so we did a lot of hiking around Patagonia, my boyfriend and I, and the ice fields, the southern ice fields, are some of the most beautiful. It's like some of the most beautiful glaciers I've ever seen. They're like maybe even more beautiful than Antarctica, because in Antarctica everything's like really heavily covered in snow, or at least the times of year that I've been there, which is early in their summer, which is our November. But then, so sorry, I got distracted because the video just, no. What was I saying? Yeah, so, but the glaciers in Patagonia are just so blue. I don't know why they're, maybe you can tell me, but like there's like Gray Glacier in Torres del Paine, and then Perito Moreno Glacier is the one that I spent a whole day just like photographing the whole face of it. There's a big infrastructure in front of Perito Moreno Glacier. And so you can like get up close and personal with it more than any other glacier I've seen. It's pretty cool. Because normally it's not safe to go up close in a boat because there could be a calving chunk that comes off and makes a wave that kills everybody. But this is Perito Moreno Glacier is situated kind of in a way where there's like a piece of land here with the walkways, and then the glacier is coming here off of another island in front. And so you can get up really close and it's safe. And so anyway, my whole next body of work, the images that I showed you before, I wish I could pull them up here, but I don't know how to do that. Is going to be of this one glacier, and it's just, yeah, I don't know. Do you know why they're more blue there? Is it more?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you brought that up because one of the things that is studying is, it's right here, is a light interaction with snow and ice. So what actually happens when sunlight hits the surface of snow and ice? And so one of the things is that visible light, where we see, it can actually penetrate into ice. So ice is transparent. That's why we can see through clean ice. Mm-hmm. But the blue light kind of gets in there and scatters around. And it can get really deep into the ice. And so it's scattering around and then kind of reflecting back. And that's why glaciers look blue when they're clean, when we can see this like sort of pure blue ice. But what's also being shown here is some impurities. So you can see these like dark parts of the ice. And those accumulate just like a glacier builds up from snow over time. Snow also gets deposited kind of different aerosols, and those kind of melt out as the snow melts out or the glacier melts out. Those kind of come out and accumulate at the surface. Mm-hmm. And those are much darker than snow or ice, and they can accelerate melting. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that's happened with the Industrial Revolution, kind of hand in hand with climate change, is an increase of dark aerosols like soot. And those have been depositing on a sort of our pristine snow-covered regions. And when soot deposits there, it makes the snow melt faster. So that sort of darkening is indicative of sort of these more complicated impacts than just warming temperatures. It's sort of more involved than that is what's sort of impacting these regions.
Yeah. Okay, wow, thank you. I've been looking for an explanation for that actually for this next body of work, so that was very helpful. Should we open up to Q&A now?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. Let me go over to the. I'm in polls suddenly. How did that happen? Admin, here we go. Okay, first question is for me. Do you have any stories of your art speaking to someone and them having an aha moment on climate? Ooh, good question. The sun's finally coming through on my face. I was hoping that would be happening earlier, but yeah, I'm trying to think if I have an actual, I've had moments where people have told me like that they've learned so much about climate change and they had no idea, or that they want to, like, all of a sudden they've decided to switch majors and they want to study environmental science and focus on climate. So yeah, I guess you could call those aha moments. And they're always very gratifying when it happens. It's like, okay, my work is doing something, you know?
Nice, I see this next question is why is Greenland such a hot spot for climate change research? And then how do I sort of take what I've learned there and other scientists and communicate sort of how that's relevant back here in the US? And I think it's maybe a bit of a pun that it's called a hotspot for climate change. Pun probably not intended there, but Greenland is really changing so rapidly. The melt is so, it's happening faster than most people would have guessed even 10 or 15 years ago. And so there's so much research going on there because the change is happening so quickly, and also because it's a huge mass of ice on land. As that ice melts, it's contributing water to the oceans. And so when you are contributing water to the oceans from ice on land, that means you get sea level rise. And so when you get melt from, say, sea ice or icebergs or other things that are in water, they're displacing water. It's not quite as dramatic as effect. But when you get melt from ice on land, then it contributes to sea level rise. So both Greenland and Antarctica are hotspots for climate change research because they are changing and they are contributing water to sea level rise. And that's why there's so much focus on them, and it's also relevant for us here in the States, not only for the coastal states that could be impacted by sea level rise, but also just generally, it's really important for our global climate. That large extent of snow and ice helps keep our climate cool by reflecting more sunlight. And so the less snow and ice we have, that just means that climate change is going to accelerate more and more. So it's really relevant. And we can take things that we learn in Greenland and apply them to glaciers elsewhere in the world. I mean, I think snow and ice research is really relevant, even though we only have seasonal snow, primarily seasonal snow in the Western US. Studying snow and ice, you can take those concepts and apply them pretty much to all the frozen parts of the world.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the next one. It's for both of us. How do you stay inspired while seeing the dramatic climate changes? I think that's exactly what inspires me, actually, because it's such a big issue and it's happening so fast and it's global. I think it's the largest crisis we face as a global society. And so that just that's what is sort of like the fire under my ass, it's like, that's what keeps me going and making drawings as much as fast as I possibly can, as big as I possibly can, to just try and play as big of a role in this huge crisis as I possibly can. And just from like an artistic perspective, I think ice and water in all of its forms is just kind of endlessly inspiring to me. And until I completely know how to draw it, which I don't think will ever happen, I'll always have something to learn, and so that's endlessly inspiring to me. And also, one last thing, I think maybe I wonder if you meant like, how do we stay positive since there's so much bad stuff that's happening? And they're really, like, the grand scheme of things, we're moving in the right direction. That's like the main thing that keeps me positive, is I just keep looking at where we were 10 years ago and what we've done between then and now. It's not enough at all, but we're still moving in the right direction, just not fast enough. And there are a lot of really inspiring good things that are happening out there. You just have to look for them. But there's really like huge progress that we're making. Solar energy is like way cheaper than it used to be, way much more affordable actually than gas now. And anyway, I won't go through the whole list, but there's a lot of things to celebrate, is what I mean.
I agree. I think, I mean, I always like to start with saying, we kind of have to stay positive and we have to stay inspired, because it seems like the other option just leads down to a path of inaction. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go down that path, and I really encourage everybody to look for the things that we can do. Even small changes can make a difference. And really what keeps me going, there's kind of two things. One, I don't have any kids myself, but I have two nieces, and I want them to be able to experience the earth and the beauty of outside the same way that I've been able to growing up. So it's really about the next generation and not being selfish. So, we could do everything and take all the resources and have great lives ourselves. But how does that leave the world for the next generation and for the children that are to come after them? So it's my nieces and then the students that I teach, and let's leave this world a better place than how we found it. And that's really kind of what keeps me going.
There's a baby in my belly, so that means a lot to me.
Oh, that's exciting. Congratulations.
The next question is, for both of us, what has been the most impactful study research for McKenzie or piece of art for me? Conveniently, we will be showing you a time lapse of a drawing that I made at the end of this video when we're done talking. It's a short time lapse, and it was definitely one of the most impactful moments I've ever had in the landscape. And then taking the time to draw it, which took me all summer. It's a really big piece. But also, actually, now that I think about it, the one that you guys already saw, The first one that we were talking about, Greenland, that McKenzie helped us understand scientifically better. Yes, thank you. That piece, I ended up donating for a really incredible project that conserved an entire rainforest in Guatemala, like a really biodiverse, old growth cloud forest, actually, not rainforest. And so it's cool because this gave me the opportunity to actually measure like this many inches of a drawing saved this many miles of rainforest. Yeah, usually like the impact of my work is so nebulous and I'm like, I don't know, hopefully I'm inspiring people and making a difference, but like this I could like actually measure. And so in terms of like impact, I would say that's the biggest.
That's really cool. And for me, I think the research that maybe this is part of what like keeps me inspired is I've been able to do a lot of work in the Western US, and this is, you know, where I grew up and it's really important to me. But we actually have a pretty dense observation network in the Western US and this huge infrastructural network that can capture snowmelt runoff. And that doesn't exist in other places in the world, like high mountain Asia or the Himalayas, where there's many more people that depend on snowmelt runoff and glacier runoff from those regions. So being able to take what I've learned about snow and climate change in the Western US and then apply it to more resource poor regions like the Himalayas has probably been some of the more impactful research that I think I've done.
Thank you. All right, I think we're gonna wrap up the questions now. And I just wanna thank you all so much for joining us and let you know that the next episode of the Outdoor State of Mind is this Thursday, featuring professional ultra runner Claire Gallagher and another member of POW's Incredible Science Alliance, Dr. Jude Bayham, an environmental economist at Colorado State. And as I mentioned before, since my work is really visual, I just wanted to show you more. So we've got the time lapse coming up next. It's just a short 1-minute piece. And you'll see me make one of the drawings that was the most impactful to me. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you enjoyed this whole discussion. Thank you so much, McKenzie. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.